Hello and welcome to the In the Tank podcast, episode 210, the podcast that explores work of think tanks across the country. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal, and joining us today, we got a full house here. We've got Justin Haskins via the internet, editorial director here at the Heartland Institute. How are you, good sir?
I'm doing great, Donald. How are you?
Oh, fabulous, as always. Also,
fabulous.
Also joining us via the interwebs, we have Isaac Orr, policy fellow at the Center of the American Experiment. How are you, sir?
I'm great.
Awesome. And across the table from me, Jim Lakely, Director of Communications here at the Heartland Institute. How are you, sir?
Doing great. Happy to be on the show again.
Absolutely. We've got a couple of topics that we want to get to. Bernie Sanders' extreme wealth tax. And then we also have the Rand Paul waste report that I want to get into as well. But before we get into any of that, a couple of things. Jim, I'll let you pitch the benefit dinner in a minute. But there was something that I saw on the news last night. It was like a local news station that really grinded my gears, I must say. So do you all remember, it must have been a couple of months ago, the Cubs fan that was ejected or not allowed back in Wrigley Field because he did the little OK symbol below his waist for the punching game, the circle game?
I remember that.
Do you remember that, gentlemen?
I remember it.
Okay, yeah. So this was like part of a kind of a longer thing going on where there was like this debate, I guess, in the public sphere about whether or not that symbol stood for white supremacy or white power or something like that, right? Even though everybody gives that symbol constantly all of the time. But apparently the Anti-Defamation League just ruled that is a hate symbol.
Ruled? Are they the authority over us?
Dictated.
Okay.
Dictated that was
decided, I guess.
Yes. So while the local news station was talking about this, they showed a clip of that kid in the Wrigley Field doing it, and they blurred it out.
Oh, my God.
Whoa. It's like the bird.
They blurred it out.
That's great. I didn't see that coming. I didn't know where this story was going, but I'm glad we ended up there. That's hilarious.
Man,
How insane is that?
I hate
That's awesome.
I hate our media is so bad. It is just so bad. I mean, the national media like CNN, MSNBC are pretty awful. New York Times, Washington Post are pretty awful. And what's really discouraging is when you see local news also go down into the depths of ultra wokeness and fake news and all that stuff. And
But they were always bad. Right?
Yeah,
the local news was like, look at the squirrel that was caught in the tree and the firefighters went to rescue it.
Right. The stories were stupid, but they weren't so biased and they were just incompetent enough to give you nice, easy news. In Chicago, it's, how many people were shot and killed today.
Well, no, the
Did
thing
they play
is,
like cheery music behind it?
it's like the chilling effect. If God forbid they showed that clip uncensored, then all of a sudden they would be on like the front lines of I can't believe they showed this, not blurred. Like they'd be all over CNN if they didn't do it. So
actually, Obama used to make that symbol
Everyone
all the
does.
time when he would speaking. So maybe it would have been safe for them to show a picture of Obama doing the OK sign while speaking. Maybe they'd have to blur that too, right?
blur it out. It's unbelievable.
It's pretty funny. It's pretty ridiculous. It really is. My wife has started doing this symbol to me as like a joke, I thought.
Yeah.
So for weeks she was giving me this OK symbol, these two OK signs. She'd be holding them up and it was like in certain contexts it made perfect sense that this was a joke. And so finally I made like some kind of a comment referencing the fact that, she must be a racist or whatever, right? Because these are the kinds of conversations me and my wife have.
Yeah.
And she says to me, she goes, what are you talking about? And I'm like, well, because you keep showing this sign, right? And she's had no clue what I was talking about. Of course not. No clue at all.
Right.
And I said, well, then what are you doing the sign for? And she goes, it's the sign from Jerry Seinfeld. The episode with the whole Van Buren boys thing, do you remember that?
Yeah.
But she got it wrong, and she thought that it was 2 3s instead of the 3 and the 5.
Right.
So
yeah,
she
she's been the
totally-
eighth president of the United States.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
So she totally butchered it. She's been doing this for weeks, and I thought it was like a commentary on this social thing that's going on. In reality, she's just referencing Seinfeld.
So you thought your wife was being racist, but she was actually being an accidental racist instead.
Well, I mean, your wife's a white supremacist. There's
Obvious.
My least favorite part of this whole story is that there might be like 12 people in all of existence to actually use that, the OK sign for the purposes that the ADL is apparently suggesting it is. And
Yeah.
it ruins it for everybody.
Well, what's even
Yeah, you're right. And you could tell those people are racist because they're also wearing a KKK hood.
Yeah.
yeah.
have a swastika tattoo on their neck.
This whole thing started as a goof on 4chan, for crying out
Yes.
loud. They said, let's see if we can come up with something so absurd
Yep.
that the mainstream media will run with it and call it racist. So they came up with the OK sign,
Yeah.
where it begins WP. And what's even dumber about our really stupid media is that this Cub fan at the Wrigley Field, he had it upside down because he was playing the circle game.
Yeah.
So what he was really showing was what an M and D, not even WP.
He's just a big fan of doctors.
Oh my gosh, our media is just so dumb.
It's insane. But yeah, watch out, like movie studios. If one Nazi watches it, then all of a sudden your movie might be labeled a hate movie for all we know.
Yeah, I think the last scene in Beverly Hills Cop has Eddie Murphy doing the OK sign, as a matter of
Boom.
fact.
Get the ADL on the phone. We need to put that on the banned list. That's insane. Oh gosh. All right. Jim.
I think the bigger scandal here, though, Donnie, honestly, is that you were watching the local news.
Well, to my credit,
That's
it
terrible.
actually came on.
Yeah, let's not get away from the main point.
It came on after the Thursday night football game.
Whatever. Yeah. Whatever. No, it didn't. You tuned in especially for that.
You don't
and-
even like football.
Yeah.
I don't watch TV. Like, it was just on. That just came on afterwards. So anyways, let's move on, gentlemen. Let's get to our actual topics. But before we do that, Jim, this is your last chance to pitch the benefit dinner.
Yes, last chance. 1 week from today, as a matter of fact, October 4th at the Cotillion in Palatine, Illinois. Be among the many hundreds that are going to be there to watch Glenn Beck give a fantastic presentation on our theme of stopping socialism. In fact, Justin Haskins, star of this podcast, is also going to be speaking
Co-star.
about, co-star, whatever, contributor to this podcast. Was
Also ran on this podcast.
Yes, we'll be giving a speech on stopping socialism, and it is in fact Justin's great work in the public, speaking and promoting the idea that we have to stop socialism from taking hold in the United States, especially getting that message to young people, is the reason Glenn Beck noticed Justin Haskins in his work, and is the reason Glenn Beck is going to be with us next week. So that's October 4th at the Cotillion in Palatine, Illinois, from about 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. Get your tickets at heartland.org today.
That is correct. And I will be there. So if you are a fan of the podcast, give me a hey, what's up? And I'll say nothing much. And then, we'll have that connection. All right. Let's get to our actual topics at hand here. Let's start off with the Rand Paul waste report. So this was something that was sent to me by J-Mobile, or JTV as I like to call him, a few days ago. And it highlights, amongst other things, just a bunch of waste, the things that the government spends money on that is just absurd. So I have in front of me two of them. I've got the spring 2019 report, and I've got the summer 2019 report. And so it starts off with a nice little intro, couple paragraphs. And it kind of points out that we have more than $22 trillion in debt. It says, despite record revenues thanks to the tax reform, the federal government still managed to increase the debt by $1.2 trillion in fiscal year 2018 due to drastic increases in spending. So it also says that the Congressional Budget Office and the Office of Management and Budget agree that spending on interest on the debt alone will exceed defense spending in 5 years and cost nearly $1 trillion in just 10 short years. So I looked that up, and I found one thing that said that just paying for the interest on the debt, 2019, $389 billion. That is set to balloon to $914 billion by 2028. So this isn't actually paying for any services or building any roads or protecting the country or anything like that. This is straight paying interest on the debt. Absolutely bizarre.
Well, not bizarre. We've been going down this road for, what, 50 years?
Yeah, I guess.
You know, it's funny. I was watching Hannity last night, and Newt Gingrich, was it Hannity? I don't know. So I was watching Fox News, and Newt Gingrich was a guest. And, you know, Fox News has this new thing, Fox Nation, basically, you know, their version of streaming video, kind of a separate network online. And Newt Gingrich is going to have a special on, because it's the 25th anniversary of the Contract with America. Okay. Now, you guys are all too young to remember the Contract with America.
Justin isn't.
Justin might have remembered it as a tiny, tiny baby.
Is that like the de Tocqueville social contract thing? Was that long ago?
Well, not quite that long.
Oh, that's why Jim remembers it.
Yeah,
so well.
that's right. Yeah, I mean, it was hard for me to read the parchment these days with my bad eyes.
Those old eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah, those old eyes.
But he was bragging about the contract with America. I mean, the Democrats had control of the House of Representatives for 40 years, and it was thought that was just our permanent state of governance, that, you know, we'd get Republican presidents, but the House would always be controlled by Democrats. And Newt Gingrich came along and said, you know what, we're going to unify and unite behind one message. We're going to put out this contract with America that's going to have things on it like tax cuts, and we're going to have we're going to make members of Congress adhere to the same laws we pass for everybody else. We want to have term limits. We want to have this and that. And he actually bragged on Fox News by saying, yes, and we also said, let's have a balanced budget. And we won on those ideas. And I heard Newt say that. It's like, balanced budget is hilarious.
Right.
Because we never got to a balanced budget, and we never will. And because deficit spending, you know, increased. It actually decreased a little bit actually during the 1990s, but that had a lot to do with the tech boom bringing in revenue. But, you know, we've been overspending for all of our lifetimes, going back beyond before all of us were born. And it's going to continue this way until, I guess, Justin, one day it won't. It'll just stop and we'll go bankrupt. I mean, I don't know. There just seems to be no end in sight. And I actually find it hard to get excited or upset about the idea that we are spending too much money, because nobody else seems to care. Nobody else seems to think this is going to ruin the country. So why should I care?
That's how most people feel, right? That it does that. You know, we've been hearing about the deficit for a long, long time. It keeps getting worse, and we keep being told that the sky is going to fall down at any moment. I'm one of those people that are always saying that the sky is going to fall down. In fact, so I know that there are people out there doing this, and I think people hear this over and over and over again, and they think, well, nothing happens. Nothing bad happens. They keep spending all this money. They keep printing money. They keep getting loans from borrowing, having foreign countries borrow money for the United States to help fund all of this, and nothing bad ever happens. So I guess that means nothing bad will ever happen in the future. But that's the thing. These crises eventually occur. It's inevitable. You can't just continue to spend money beyond what you bring in forever. It will eventually come back to haunt you. And for those people who say, I don't, we've been hearing this for decades. That is exactly what happened with the housing crisis.
Yeah.
For decades, there were people, not a lot of people, but there were people closely following what was going on there, saying, if we don't turn around soon, this whole gigantic house of cards that's been built, this corrupt, ridiculous system that we have with the housing market, these inflated prices, it's going to eventually come crashing down. The bubble is going to pop. And for years, people made massive financial investments in that industry, thinking it was never going to happen. And then one day, seemingly out of nowhere, it happened. And then the entire global economy, not just the United States, but the global economy came crashing down as a result of it. The same thing is going to happen with the debt here in the United States, in Japan, and in other countries. There are all these deflationary forces, that are keeping inflation from happening as a result of the fact there are many different reasons why that's occurring, but it's keeping inflation from completely getting out of control. Eventually, those deflationary forces are going to disappear. You're going to have runaway inflation, and the only way to solve that is going to be to stop spending so much money right away, which is going to be basically impossible because we got to keep spending money in order to pay the debt that we've already incurred for decades and decades and decades. So you can't just stop spending money unless you're going to default on all those payments, or you're going to have to jack up interest rates to obscene heights. In the 1970s, they had interest rates as high as 18%. You're going to have interest rates even higher than that in order to bring that down, which is going to force the economy to come to a screeching halt. And we're going to enter into a recession period that's going to make the Great Recession look, like absolute, like good times, like good economic times. I mean, this is going to happen eventually. It's inevitable. Yeah. It may take 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, but it will happen.
Right. And I would assume that somebody that's kind of, on the fence, I guess, so whether or not we need to have the government spend all of this money, seemingly every time the budget kind of debate comes up, nothing's cut, so it seems like all that stuff is important.
Well, right. And I don't want the listeners to think I'm blasé about the national debt. I think it is a serious problem, and I agree with what Justin just said. But I have a hard time. I have a lot of things in life. There's a lot of things about the world, and especially our government, that I get upset about. And I have to just kind of move this aside because I just don't have the room for it.
It's the boiling water. You're the frog in the pot, and it's getting warmer and warmer and warmer.
No, I'm the realist who understands that the only way to solve this problem in a real way is to reduce the size of government, to literally slash and get rid of entire departments.
No doubt.
And that gets us on the road to maybe being able to solve this problem. And I know that is just never, ever, ever going to happen. In fact, the only way that we're ever going to really reduce the size of government, and that's an outside chance of that at best, is if we get that apocalyptic economic collapse that Justin thinks it could be 20 or 30 years down the line. Because you think about Greece. Greece was collapsed entirely economically.
Sure.
Greece probably has an economy about the size of, I don't know, maybe Illinois, maybe North Carolina, who knows. But, I don't imagine they don't have social services anymore. They haven't reduced the size of their government. They just find a way to move on.
They got austerity forced upon them by the European Union, but so that's not
basically
the best
by
thing.
The European Union as well. There's nobody who's going to bail us out. When we come crashing down, it's all on us. We're totally screwed, and that's just the reality. However, I agree with Jim completely.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we lost Justin's his sound a little bit, which is maybe fortunate. But there's no economy big enough to really bail us out, I don't think, right? I mean, that's part of the problem too, because Greece is relatively small relative to the EU. But the one thing I did want to say, this reminds me a lot of my Uncle Tim, right? So
where you?
I grew up.
I'm curious to see where this ends.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, here's the thing, like. This idea of bankruptcy, spending more money, deficit spending always looks good until it screeches to a halt.
Sure.
Right? So he had racked up hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. And, everything seemed good. He had a higher standard of living than we did because we did not, rack up that sort of deficit spending. So it looked a lot better than our situation. But then one day the bank came and took all of his stuff and he had nothing. So I don't really like my Uncle Tim. So I like that story. But it looks good while it's happening. But once the bill comes due, it's a lot worse situation that you would have been in otherwise.
I was thinking, I brought this up to Justin like last week, but isn't there like room? Don't you think that there's room to have an argument against like high national debt and just like craft it specifically in an environmentalist perspective? Like if you're talking to these people that are really concerned about the environment and pollution and all of those things, can't you just say like this extreme amount of national debt basically forces us to constantly grow economically so that we could, make that debt manageable in some way. So it's like by having a high national debt, we are forcing us to stay on this path of more and more economic development, just development in general, developing more land and creating more people. They don't like people, right? So it's just like it would be in their best interest, the environmentalists, to look forward and to take us off of that necessity to constantly grow. We need to get rid of our national debt. Do you think that would work in their minds at all?
No, because they're all insane. The only thing they want to do is enslave us and take away all of our wealth and to save the earth. So I don't think your proposal, while maybe sound in some ways, is a non-starter.
Yeah,
Justin,
they are looking to impose austerity, but they want to spend a lot of money to do it.
Yeah,
that's funny.
Yeah, I don't know. Especially since Japan, they do have that problem where they spend tons and tons of money. They have like basically the highest debt to GDP ratio in the world, and very poor economic growth. So maybe the plan all along is to just spend us into debt, put government thing, and then that way there's no economic growth that way. You know, maybe that's the plan.
Well, Saint Greta, as we might get to later in the podcast, chided the United Nations for thinking that we could have more economic growth as far as the eye can see, and then that's somehow an evil. So
yeah, right, exactly. And this idea of having a massive national debt that we have to theoretically pay off, or at least finance that continuously, puts us on that where we have to grow. All right. So anyways, we're getting way off the topic here of this waste report. So like I said, I've got the spring and summer 2019. I just want to go through a couple of these to kind of give you examples of just the ridiculous things that our federal government is spending our tax dollars on. Gentlemen, feel free to find one that you think is most interesting, but just a couple here. So this one, the NIH and the NSF, I don't know, you tell me if you even know what those stand for, are spending up to $1.2 million to study online dating user habits. So this report is great, and of course it'll be linked in the show notes, but it kind of gives some details as to what this means. But if we didn't spend $1.2 million, how would we find that online dating app users pursue potential mates who are on average 25% more desirable than themselves?
Only 25%?
Yeah.
Wow.
That is invaluable information right there. I mean, thank goodness that the government took my tax money at the threat of force to find that out.
Let's spend another $1 million and see how many people have fake photos of themselves on their social media dating apps.
Oh, man, you don't need to spend a dime to know that's true.
Here's another good one. I'll let you jump in if you've got one in mind there, Jim. USAID is spending $20 million to teach Lao to Laotians. So it says that, that's exactly what the USAID is doing. Committing 20 million American taxpayer dollars to the Lao People's Democratic Republic, a communist nation controlled by one party in pursuit of, according to the USAID, one, improved Lao reading ability for non-Lao speakers and vulnerable students, improved classroom instruction through enhanced teacher competencies and resources to meet needs of targeted children, and strengthen communities' engagement to provide a conducive learning environment. So, I mean, this sounds like a noble goal, but only when it's not using money extracted by taxpayers at the threat of force. Like, if some private charity were doing this, fantastic, whatever, do what you want. Teach Laotians Lao. I don't care. But then it also says here in the additional information section, it says more than 36 million adults in the United States cannot read, write, or do basic math above a third grade level. This is according to literacy advocates. They also note that in New Jersey alone, which has a slightly larger population than Laos, a report showed that 17% of adults lack basic literacy skills. And I thought that would be much higher in New Jersey. No, I'm just kidding. But Isaac, as somebody who can't read, how do you feel about this?
Yeah, I'm not sure how to feel about it because I haven't read about it.
Well, wait a minute. So we're how much was it again that we were sending to Laos?
$20 million.
$20 million to teach Laotians how to speak their own language?
Yes.
Yeah. Why, that is certainly a key responsibility of the American taxpayer to do that.
Absolutely.
But that's like spending money to teach Eskimos how to make snowballs. I mean, you live in Laos, you should be able to speak.
Jim, Jesus,
whatever. But if you live in Laos, it's your responsibility to learn how to speak it, not ours.
Yeah.
How much do we spend teaching kids how to learn English in the United States, though? Huh?
According to the teachers'
those kids
unions,
are in
not
the
enough.
United States, so it kind
point.
of makes sense. them.
Yeah.
Why are we teaching people in Laos? Where is Laos?
Laos.
Isn't it right by?
Where the hell is Laos?
It's like
Can
right
Google
by.
it, Justin.
It's like right by Vietnam.
Yes, Southeast Asia.
Yeah. See, I know.
Yeah, you're right. I forgot about that. Last time I was in Vietnam to stop by Laos.
Well, the only reason I know that is because the Canadian government came and spent money to teach me geography. So, come on, that was a good joke. You guys are losers. All right. Anyways, here's
I
another
wasn't
one.
sure if it was true.
I thought you were serious.
Justin Trudeau came to your classroom and told you of all the different cultures of the world.
That's right.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
center
Put
of
on
the
a
map.
performance.
Yeah, he used himself as an example in all of those cases.
The center of the map is Canada, and they worry about too many immigrants coming in from the south.
Oh, all right. Sorry, I was going to let you jump in with your favorites, but I got another one here. The State Department is spending $2 million to improve TV programming in Moldova.
They have TV in Moldova?
So my theory on this
Wow.
one is that there is some like U.S. bureaucrat who has to like regularly go to Moldova and is like angry that they don't have anything good on their TVs.
Yeah, I know. They're still running reruns of Dallas and the 1975 versions of the $100,000 Pyramid. That's what they got on TV
Right.
in Moldova.
So the path of least resistance for him was sliding in some $2 million clause to some bill that was passed at some point to enhance the Moldovan TV quality. So
That's
it's-
fantastic. Actually, the thing that really bothers me the most on here, and Justin, I think, as kind of our resident healthcare expert guy
Okay.
on this thing, is like right on the front of the page. Paid out billions in Medicare and improper payments from CMS.
Yeah.
$48 billion of improper payments in the Medicare system. And so, of course, what we should do is have Medicare or Medicaid for all, because that's what we really need, is to have that expanded by 75%, cover everybody, and that will certainly cut out all the waste and abuse and the mispayments on it, wouldn't it, Justin?
Right. Well, actually, I think you could make the argument that it is better that we're going to have all of this waste under Medicare for all, because otherwise, if we were to do exactly what Democrats want us to do and pay doctors and hospitals the rates that they are paying now, those people will all go bankrupt. So maybe the improper payments are going to balance things out a little bit, and they'll be able to survive.
spoken like a true bureaucrat. Like that's probably what their answer realistically would be. I've got a couple more here underlined. Gentlemen, do you have a favorite maybe? Isaac, I'm looking at you.
You're looking at me. Well, how about you take it and I'll find one.
All right.
I've got a favorite.
All right, go ahead, Justin.
There's one in here that says the National Science Foundation got a grant for $466,000 to study frog mating calls in Panama.
In Panama. So not even
In America. It's Panamese frogs and their mating calls.
Isn't it
466
Panamanian?
It's Panamanian.
Panamese. I don't know. I'm never going to go there, so it doesn't really matter.
Wow. God.
But the frog mating calls in Panama is obviously a very important thing. So then we also spent $100,000 to increase the capacity of the Pakistani film industry.
Yeah.
So that's good. $100,000. I mean, you and I know, Donnie, we talk about movies all the time.
Yeah.
You can make a fine film for $100,000
Yeah,
in Pakistan.
It
I'm
says
sure.
the State Department is spending up to $100,000 to expand and strengthen Pakistan's film industry by teaching aspiring filmmakers how to write screenplays and make films.
You know that they're just teaching them how to write pro-America propaganda, right? Like,
even that's the best case scenario. Like
$100,000 though. Like, what kind of movies are you going to be teaching these people to make for $100,000?
cost of production is probably a lot lower over there.
It's not zero.
Yeah, okay.
You got to adjust that. You got to put that into the
It's
local
a-
currency, Justin.
It's $100,000. I mean, my God, you couldn't teach someone to. I don't know what you could do for $100,000.
You could learn most of this stuff just by watching YouTube for free.
Well, that's
Okay,
true.
Justin?
That's true.
That's all it is. That's all it is. It's just like $100,000 just someone to send somebody a link in Pakistan.
Oh my gosh.
What I want to know is why are the frogs in Panama 5 times more important than the Pakistani film industry?
That's a very good question.
Who's making these decisions?
Environmentalists.
That is a very good question.
People before frogs, man. This is an outrage. One of my favorites is so of course the Green New Deal got rejected utterly here in the United States when there was a chance to vote on it. But our Congress did approve $10 million for Peru's own Green New Deal.
Right.
So yeah, we got to export it. $10 million.
I'm sure their carbon footprint is massive down there in Peru.
Yeah.
Actually, that's not a bad idea either, because the United States, it doesn't matter what we do here. We could cut our CO2 emissions down to nothing, and it's not going to do anything. So maybe we need to export the Green New Deal everywhere. Maybe that's the only way we save the planet from a climate catastrophe, Jim. If you actually cared about the planet and spent more time listening to Greta Thunberg or whatever the hell her name is, instead of, Coke-funded whoever that you listen to, then maybe the world would be a much better place.
Well, maybe
start with Peru. Let's start with Peru.
Can't we just export the Green New Deal by making a YouTube video and sending them the link, and then they can learn how to do it?
Yeah, that'll cost $4,000. All right, how about this one? The Department of Homeland Security and the GSA have spent over $2 billion trying to turn an abandoned mental hospital into an awesome haunted house for Halloween. No, I'm just kidding. And into the new Department of Homeland Security headquarters. It says since 2005, and at the cost of more than $2.1 billion to the taxpayer to establish a headquarters for DHS on parts of the property. It says that, as you would expect, turning an old decrepit building into a high-tech and secure government facility will probably run into a whole lot of problems, one of which is apparently this whole hospital is, unstable and sloping to one side. So they have to figure out how to fix that, apparently. Aren't you just so glad that this is what your taxpayer money is spent on? It's fantastic.
All the spending,
great stuff.
All the spending goes. So Rand Paul put this together. There's another outfit that our listeners should check out called Citizens Against Government Waste, which puts together reports like this all the time. They exist only to, find the overspending and the stupid spending that happens in the federal government, and it is obviously so big. And this doesn't say. I mean, frankly, in a what is our economy? A $3 trillion economy annually. Or is that how much?
No,
I'm sorry.
that's
what,
we're 20.
No, $3 trillion is our federal spending every year, federal outlays every year. So with a $3 trillion budget, $100,000 to teach Pakistanis how to make films, or a few $1 million to study mating calls of frogs in Panama. It doesn't seem like that much of a big deal, because it's not even a drop in the bucket.
Symptomatic of a larger problem.
Yes,
which is just the larger in scope that you get out. And the less direct that money is coming from or going to the place that's being affected, the less efficiently that it's actually going to be spent.
Right.
So one of my examples was that, if we wanted to repave the path to the school just down the street over there, if we were to try to collect income or collect donations from just the people nearest to that school, maybe people that send their kids to that school, I bet we can get that path done, for super cheap. Above ahead of schedule even. If we were to kick that all the way upstairs to the federal government, I bet it would take $5 million and 12 years to get that path made.
Absolutely. Well, actually, it just points up that like I said earlier, our government is too big. It is entirely too big. If we're spending money on these piddly things here that don't matter, and $10 million, whoever gets that grant for $10 million is damn happy they got it, right?
Sure.
And so that's a big deal to them. But you multiply that by 20,000 people that are getting $10 million, and now you're really talking about more than half the stuff the government spends money on shouldn't be spent. It's, the discretionary spending, I should say.
Let's also remember that we are running a $1 trillion deficit.
Yeah.
So this isn't even money we have. We're literally giving money to Laos and to
Pakistan, Peru.
Panama and Pakistan. And all these places, when we have absolutely no money, we have a $1 trillion deficit. So to spend this kind of money, which again, $500,000 for mating calls for frogs and, Pakistani film students, $100,000, whatever. I mean, all of that, it doesn't seem like a massive amount of money when you're talking about a $4 trillion budget. Mm-hmm. But when you're running a $1 trillion deficit, it makes absolutely no sense that we're doing this. Just absolutely no sense at all.
Well, the bad news is that in this next election, election, we have Donald Trump, who doesn't care about overspending at all. It's not an issue. He's never mentioned it, and nobody actually even pushes him on it in his own party. And on the other side, you got guys like Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren. All of them want to spend even more of our money that we don't have on even dumber projects.
Yeah.
That's because debt doesn't matter, Jim. We can just print all the money in the world. It makes no difference.
Modern monetary theory, baby.
Modern monetary theory.
All right, let's move on. Let's move on. Jim's eyes are rolling out of his head right now. I was going to mention that in the little description at the beginning of the spring issue of this waste report, it talks about how this particular report only covered $42 million in just completely wasteful spending. The summer one was a little bit better. I think their total for wasted was $50 billion, but it was kind of similar to what you guys were saying in the scope of how big the actual spending is. This is a really relatively small chunk. Obviously, this only constitutes a small fraction of the wasteful spending that's going on for sure. But I think the last thing that I want to mention on this topic is that we can't just cut out these things. We need some actual structural reform going on. But that's a topic for a different day. Let's move on to how people like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren want to raise that money. So I don't know if you have seen this yet, people listening, but Bernie Sanders just released on Tuesday what he is calling a tax on extreme wealth. So Senator Sanders proposes a tax on extreme wealth and says that this includes a progressive tax on household assets and income over $32 million for married couples. So it says that Sanders' wealth tax would begin with a 1% tax on net worth above $32 million for married couples, rising to 2% once the net worth reaches $50 million. The tax continues to increase with income, so that a net worth between $250 and $500 million is taxed at 3%, $500 million to $1 billion is taxed at 4%, $1 billion to $2.5 billion is taxed at 5%. It keeps going all the way up to above $10 billion. Your net worth is taxed at 8%. And before we kind of get into your takes on this, I do want to point out that this isn't just an income tax. This is an assets tax. So that is including pretty much everything that is under a person's, value. So this includes their homes, any other real estate that they have, cars or boats, jewelry, household items, retirement accounts, stocks, bonds, everything. They do a whole total up. Your net worth is worth X amount, and we get to tax it at one of these percentages. And then this is, of course, on top of all the other taxes that these people have to pay, income and the like. So we want to eat the rich, Jim. Do you think that do you think that'll satisfy our appetite?
No. Justin has mentioned, we run every year, we run $1 trillion deficit in this country. You could it's not just taxing these billionaires. You could confiscate every cent they have right now. You could put a gun to their head. You could take all of their assets, all of it, the cash, the properties, everything. Mm-hmm. It would not put a dent in our annual deficit. It would barely fund the government for what is, I think, like a month, and then they'd run out of money.
Sure.
This is not so. Even if you thought, this is a good idea, let's pay down the debt, it wouldn't even start to pay down the debt. It wouldn't even start to pay down 1 year's annual deficit. It is a punitive way.
Well,
it is class warfare that's going on here, and it's frankly un-American.
So, I mean, the ways that it's presented, it talks about the two economists associated with the campaign. They estimate that the tax would raise $4.35 trillion over the next 10 years. So, I mean, some quick back-of-the-envelope math. This is less than 5% of the Green New Deal. But the goal is, it says here in the top of the tax foundation, it says Sanders' goal is to target extreme wealth. That is not the case. They want to eliminate it.
Yes, that's right.
In fact, and that is proven by Bernie Sanders' tweet, and I will link this in the show notes, where he retweeted something from the New York Times that shared some article about this wealth tax, and he plainly states, billionaires should not exist. Mm-hmm. That's what he says.
Do it in the Bernie voice.
Billionaires should not exist. So Isaac, I don't know. What are your thoughts on this? You want to eat the rich?
Yeah, medium rare, please.
Yeah, we have to get into that Swedish idea of cannibalism, to save ourselves from climate change.
Everything ties together.
It really does.
On this
Yeah.
podcast.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, just because I know that they're going to spend it on bad things, I wouldn't be in favor of it. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Maybe I'd be a little more persuaded if I ever felt like this was going to affect me. Because, man, if I'm sitting on 10 million, that's pretty great. No, 32 million. Excuse me. But if they actually stop spending and they were just paying down the debt with this, I'd be more amenable to it.
Let's see
how that'll never happen.
Let's see if you're amenable to this after I get through some of these other things. But just a couple more statements by the campaign here. So one of the economists said that the mere existence of the wealth tax would, on the margin, encourage wealthy individuals to dissipate their fortunes on charitable giving and lavish consumption. If you try to hoard wealth, the government is going to tax it, so you might as well spend it. And then also, it says that, so the Sanders campaign is also calling for a national wealth registry and significant additional third-party reporting requirements, as well as increasing Internal Revenue Service funding to enforce the wealth tax. The plan calls for a mandated IRS audit of 30% of the wealth tax returns for those in the 1% bracket, and 100% audit for all billionaires. So every year, apparently. It also establishes a 40% exit tax on the net value of all assets under $1 billion and a 60% exit tax on net assets above $1 billion for anyone who wants to take their wealth to another country. Justin, seems like a pretty solid plan. What do you think?
I think it's incredible that literally anybody would propose this out in the open is truly amazing. And the fact it's even more amazing that we're not laughing this guy off of the debate stage, out of society. I mean, the fact that he's taken seriously at all is truly remarkable.
Well, what do you think about that exit tax? 40%, up to 60% of people that are trying to take their assets out of the country. What do you think about that?
Well, first of all, it would never work because as soon as it looks like this has any chance of passing at all, and it doesn't, let's be honest, it has no chance of passing. But even if it did, as soon as it looks like it might, everyone would leave. Everyone with any kind of money at all would take it out of the country before this ever becomes law. So there's no chance that it would actually go into effect and take people's wealth away, because everybody with wealth will leave the country as soon as this happens. So there's no chance of it working in that sense. The other thing is that it's interesting that they say that it's going to encourage wealthy people to spend money rather than give it in taxes. So they're saying taxes encourages people to spend money instead of giving it to the government. That's a really bizarre argument to make. But even if we say that that's true and we say that somehow that's a beneficial thing, that to encourage people to spend money that they don't really want to spend or need to spend just for the sake of spending it so they don't have to get punished by the government, it also encourages people to not make more money. Why would I make more money if I know it's going to be taken away? So whatever that threshold is, why would you continue to make investments beyond that? So everybody who has whatever up to 32 million or whatever the threshold is, once you get to that point where you're pretty close to that, you're not going to try to make more investments. What's the point? You're just going to hold on to the money and you're not going to do anything with it, or you're going to do less with it than you would otherwise because you know you have to pay this wealth tax. And the wealth tax is pointless anyway. It's not actually going to do anything because we have $1 trillion deficit and it's not going to raise any money. As Jim pointed out, you could confiscate literally every single penny from every single billionaire in the United States. It wouldn't matter. In fact, you could confiscate every single penny from every single billionaire in the entire world, and it would be like less than $10 trillion. It wouldn't even pay for half.
Yeah, and you
of
can only
our
do that
current
once.
national debt.
Right, you can only do that
Or the
once.
Green New Deal.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
I mean,
you couldn't even pay for the Green New Deal for even a fraction of the Green New Deal over the course of just the first 10 years. So what's the point of all of this? It's all meaningless.
the whole mindset behind this entire idea is so childish. It's as if these leftists, these socialists, these nuts, they have a child's understanding of economics and wealth. They think that Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos are like Scrooge McDuck. There's a huge vault, like they're Smaug, right? And there's piles of gold, and they're jumping around in it and throwing it around.
Yeah.
I don't have to spend it. I like to play with my gold.
Sure.
I mean, it's just ridiculous. The idea, and actually the rich do spend their money. It's called investing in other companies.
Yeah.
It's called giving, it's called releasing capital into the capitalist system so that other businesses can grow. Their money finds good, successful business models and helps make them more successful, which helps everybody in society. This idea that we have to get them to spend it is just so stupid. It is just such an ignorant idea of how the economy in a free society works.
Yeah, one of the things that they point out in this is the actual those economists that I kind of cited. They point out this is like part of their plan that after 15 years, the wealth of these billionaire top 1% will be reduced in half. Like that's part of their plan.
Well, another thing, and Donnie and I have been talking about.
That's their goal.
Donnie and I have been talking about this for a while, actually. What's really interesting is there's this argument that if people just have this money and they're not spending it, let's say they're not investing it, like let's say they're just sitting on it, are they stuffing it underneath their mattresses? Like, are they burying it in the backyard? No, of course not. Where is the money? The money is in a bank. And what does the bank do with the money? The bank loans the money out. Yeah. That's where they get the money. That's how money gets. And how much money does the bank hold on to? The bank only has to hold on to like 10% of 10% of the cash on hand. So most of the money that goes to a bank, a lot of that, maybe not most, but a lot of it, probably most, ends up getting loaned out to somebody else anyway. Mm-hmm. So it is all it's all being used. It's not useless. And so really what the government is saying is not, well, we want to force these people to use the money. The money is being used. That's not true. What they're really saying is we want to use the money in the way that we want, not in the way that the bank wants or the investors want or the business owners or the people who actually have the money or economists. We don't care what any of those people think. What we want to spend the money on. And so that's really the core issue. Mm-hmm. It's not like the money is not being used. It's just not being used the way socialists like Bernie Sanders want to use it.
Extracting the money out of the private sector and putting it into the public sector. That is what this all is about. Yeah,
exactly.
So the other thing that kind of strikes me is that these politicians proposing this can't seem to learn from like they came up with this idea. This is the first time that this idea has ever been thought of. That's not the case. Apparently in Europe, during the 70s and 80s, there was a whole rash of countries that tried to do something like this. There was actually 14 countries in the OECD that had wealth taxes, and that is down to 4 right now. 4 countries. Everyone else repealed it. And the reason why? Apparently it's very hard to actually carry this out. It's really hard to actually total what people's net values are and figure out what the value of somebody's ring in their wardrobe is worth and all of that. So here's just a couple of examples. Austria abolished its wealth tax in 1994, mainly due to high administrative costs that occurred in the data collection process, and because of the economic burden the wealth tax meant to Austrian enterprises. Finland abolished its wealth tax in 2006, a reform motivated by the fact that the tax had an unfair impact on enterprises and provided many possibilities to evade. France abolished its wealth tax in 2017. I think they actually brought part of it back in 2019. But they abolished it in 2017 after many news articles noted that wealthy entrepreneurs and celebrities were fleeing the country. The government estimated that some 10,000 people with $35 billion worth of euros in assets left in the past 15 years under their high wealth tax policy. Ireland imposed a wealth tax in 1975 due to concerns about wealth inequality. The tax was shot full of exemptions, raised little money, and the administrative costs were high. They repealed it 3 years later. And the last one I'll read here, but I'll link this in the show notes so you can see the rest of them. Sweden repealed its wealth tax in 2007 as it became clear that it was driving business people, such as the founder of IKEA, out of the country. An analysis by Swedish economists found that the wealth tax revenues were declining as people could, with impunity, evade the tax by taking appropriate measures.
Of course. They're billionaires. They can do whatever they want.
Yeah, so as soon as Bernie Sanders becomes the nominee or anything like that, they probably will wait, if he becomes president or if this bill even comes close to having the amount of support that it would require, then they're just gone.
Look, it's an economic law that if you tax something, you get less of it. In fact, even socialists understand this because they want to always raise taxes on cigarettes because we need to get people off of smoking. The socialists say we need to have gas prices in the United States to go up to like $15 or $18 a gallon because we want people driving less. And so they understand that basic economics. So if you tax billionaires and their wealth, you're going to end up with fewer billionaires and less wealth. And you should understand that's exactly what Bernie Sanders wants. He thinks that, well, he even said we shouldn't have any billionaires.
Yeah,
like, all right, so
they shouldn't exist.
They shouldn't exist. It's not that we should have. They shouldn't exist. So his idea is to just get rid of all billionaires. But let me ask you and the listeners and everybody on this podcast this:
Yeah,
would it have been a better thing for the United States of America if Bill Gates created his billionaire fortune of Microsoft in China?
Right.
Would the United States be a better place, a better society, and a better place to live if Jeff Bezos created Amazon in, I don't know, France?
Yeah.
Would that have made the United States better or worse? It is undoubtedly that the United States would be a worse place if the billionaires, we have more billionaires than any country in the world.
I have a better hypothetical.
And that's a good thing.
I have a better hypothetical question for you here. Okay, so, this idea that we're really worried about wealth inequality. What if we woke up tomorrow and found out that Jeff Bezos, who's worth like $100 billion, and Bill Gates, which is worth like $90 billion, what if we found out that they were actually cooking their own books and their net worth was actually half of what is being shown in the thing? Does that make your life any better?
No.
Right. That's the point.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. If we were to completely tax away all of their wealth and it's, being spent on frivolous things like, frog mating calls and right. Like, does that make your life any better?
No, it doesn't. But what makes me madder is this idea, the more you think about this whole idea, because you're right, Justin, this is never going to happen. You never know, but it's very, very unlikely something like this would happen in the United States, at least soon. But the fact that this thing has basically an escape tax, that's the analogy that got in my head was the Berlin Wall. The East Germans built the Berlin Wall to keep the people from leaving and escaping East Berlin into freedom. No. And so this is like an economic Berlin Wall. Well, they'll shoot you, at least in the wallet.
Yeah.
On your way, if you try to get over the wall and get out of the United States, which is going to be a bad place for business. I mean, that is so un-American.
It's unbelievable.
That you would have an escape tax, building an economic Berlin Wall to keep your billionaires in there until we suck you dry and ruin your businesses.
That is
then
actually,
maybe we'll be happy.
That's a good slogan. The exit tax is an economic Berlin Wall.
Yeah. Right. And another interesting thing is if you just look at countries that don't have these kinds of taxes, they don't penalize the rich, they have a lot of investment freedom, you'll find that a lot of them are extremely wealthy. If you look at the Heritage Foundation's Index for Economic Freedom, for instance, and you look at just their investment freedom scores, these are the countries that have the top freedom scores. Mm-hmm. Luxembourg, Austria, Denmark, Hong Kong, Ireland, the Netherlands, United Kingdom, and Estonia. Most of those countries are very wealthy countries. So, I mean, there's a reason for that. It's because the wealthy people are welcome there. If you make a country if you have a country's policies created in such a way that they penalize the wealthy, well, then those people leave and they go to those other countries where they're not being penalized. That's why I believe, and I think it's throughout Karl Marx's writing, it's really everywhere throughout the left. If you take the left's logic to its logical conclusion, to its logical ends, you have to have a global government.
Yeah. Because
none of these policies actually make any sense unless you have a global government. I mean, they don't make sense then either, but they make more sense. If you're going to punish the rich, if you're going to say, well, we're just going to take away all their wealth, that's what we're going to do. And you say, well, but there's a place for the rich to go to escape that. They're going to do it. But if there's a global government enacting a wealth tax, there's no place for those people to escape. Yeah. And so that's why all of these policies, many of them, whether we're talking about global warming or we're talking about wealth taxes or just high income taxes in general or whatever it is, business taxes, none of them actually work unless you have total control over the entire world's economy. And so really, I mean, I know I sound like a conspiracy theorist, but seriously, none of them actually would work unless you have a global government. They know that. And so that's why you see them constantly pushing for policies at the United Nations, treaties, all these different things when it comes to whether it's economic issues or you're talking about global warming or whatever it is. There's a reason why they're always going to the United Nations and making such a big deal out of those treaties and agreements. It's because ultimately they know that's the only way to enact their policies. Otherwise, they all completely fall apart.
Yep, and the estimate of the $4 trillion that they would get, obviously they would end up getting a fraction of that, and then similar to when the income tax was kind of instituted in the United States, it started off as only affecting a small amount of people and a very small percentage. That percentage grew and grew and grew. Obviously, this one would as well. We are running out of time, Isaac. I will give you the final word, sir.
Yeah, I guess if we did have that global government and they were enacting all these wealth taxes, you can bet we'd be on Mars.
Yes, right.
They'd figure it out.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that will do it for this episode. Thank you for tuning in. Tune in every Friday for a new episode of the In the Tank podcast. If you like our show, please subscribe, write a review for us on iTunes. We'd greatly appreciate it. You could also find us on SoundCloud, Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, YouTube, pretty much everything nowadays. If you'd like, you can follow us on Twitter at In the Tank Pod. If you want to send us your comments, suggestions, questions, anecdotes, jokes, whatever you'd want, feel free to email us at inthethankpodcast@gmail.com. Jim, where can the fine people find you?
They can find me at J Lakely or at Heartland Inst.
Justin, where can the fine people find you?
On Twitter and Facebook at Justin T. Haskins. Look for the big, beautiful blue check mark.
And Isaac, where can the fine people find you?
On Twitter at The Fracking Guy and at AmericanExperiment.org.
Thank you all for
Don't
listening.
look for the blue check mark.
We'll talk to you.
You won't find it.
Next week.